customer in addition to, this being a partnership for great discussion. All right, so this is the part where I go into a little more formalized presentation. And as advertised, the topic here is looking at some real-world events that have affected critical infrastructures that we depend upon. We're going to talk about two in a high degree of detail. Welcome.
Apologize for being late.
No worries. So we're gonna dig into some of the details behind this, because there is absolutely something to be learned from these prior events, and the whole intent here is to establish a body of knowledge. Think about other systems that are out there. We can be proactive and take steps to address those. So the boom boom out goes the lights is what I call this. Anybody remember that song?
I guess you got to be a little black.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I say boom boom, and you all say out go the lights. There's actually a theme to that, and it will become more clear as we dig into it. So here's an important thing. As you might have noticed, we had 20 registrants for this. I'm not counting 20. That means that we've got pizza for like 25. Please just feel free, especially our newest guests here, just go get stuff. This is by no way, a formal presentation. That's an even better approach. That's great. And there's, you can see the beverages as well. This is not meant to be self-serving. What I wanted to just convey to you is that I built my position in industry over 20 years ago, joining a major controls provider, Rockwell Automation. They hold a very strong position in North America as well as globally. But it gave me a great opportunity to learn about all these different sectors that we depend on. And it's everything from the typical suspects like utilities for power generation and transmission, water, whether it's clean water or wastewater. But I also had the fortunate experience of seeing a variety of manufacturing, critical manufacturing in some cases, stuff that we depend on, like cars that we have high demand for, complex products like that. But then other things that are really important in my household, like Pop-Tarts and Twinkies, and consumer packaged goods like our shampoo and our toothpaste, razors, all that stuff. It was fascinating to me 20 years ago, stepping into an environment that is actually very high tech. For some of you that really have seen these systems, or maybe even watched the How's It Made type shows on TV, there's a tremendous amount of technology in these systems that is often underappreciated. And there are great lengths that are taken to make sure that they operate with safety, with reliability, to be very efficient at what they do. And I'm assuming that the reason why you're here is that you also recognize that these systems are now connected, exposed, and susceptible to tampering and malicious activities, because that's really what's happened over the years. And I've had this fortunate opportunity to watch how this disconnected world of these complex machines has become connected and now exposed. So when we talk about critical infrastructure, with our transportation, our water, our power, a variety of others, don't lose sight of all the other systems that are making sure that we get the goods that we need to really exist the way that we want to in the world that we build for ourselves here. All right, so I use this slide a lot to draw a contrast between information technology and operations technology. And the operations technology is representing that control system, whether it's in a Hershey plant that's making what do they make there? They make all kinds of stuff, but your favorite chocolate bar or Reese's Pieces or whatever, to other things that we depend on, like like making sure that when we turn on the faucet, we actually have water and that we have clean water. So there's a big contrast between IT and OT in that in the IT world, we're moving bits and bytes, and nobody really gets hurt by that directly. If a bit is lost on the wire, you know, the systems are resilient enough that they'll retry the communication, but it's not like something has just affected someone in a negative sense that their life is in danger. It's not a life-changing event normally. There's downstream consequences for lost data, but nothing that happens in what I call the meat space. Meat space, got that? Contrast that with a manufacturing environment, a process environment, where the reason why we're moving bits is that we need something physical to happen. There's big machinery that operates. There's pressures and temperatures and flows that if things aren't exactly right, bad things happen. And we see that in our daily lives, you know, as we watch, regrettably, things like refineries explode, and when they go and analyze that, they can trace it back to a series of events. Sometimes it's a mechanical failure. Oftentimes there's some human element involved in that as well. So it's important for us to have that contrast, because what's happened is it's a dotted line I've drawn there that is very quickly disappearing, because in both cases there's a communication network that knits everything together, and we have to focus on separating the data out, but also setting a priority to the data that is used in these systems. And that means that the network is ever more important, and that's why we have exposures that are resulting in disruption, damage, and destruction. So if we kind of play off of this IT-OT comparison a little further, if there is a difference between the information tech and the operations tech, it really comes down to, you know, what we're doing to protect assets in a physical sense, and what we're doing to maintain the safety of operation, that if there's a disruption, it could affect the worker that's operating that machine or have further reaching consequences within the company for its reputation, lost product, lost machinery, or even the community, or even our national security. We see control systems everywhere. You know, Roger and I come from this environment that we serve the critical infrastructure space with machinery to give us clean water and stuff. Fred comes from the building automation space to make sure we have, you know, lighting control and heating and ventilation. It's all control systems, it's all connected, and the difference, again, between IT and OT is what's happening in a physical manner, in a physical space. So I had, I guess I'll call it a privilege of participating on a team as a result of a White House order that was specifically focused on how can we better address risk to our critical infrastructures, critical manufacturing included. And as a result of this executive order, there was a whole team and basically a community of you know, people from industry that came together and started to look at this problem and identify the risk, but more importantly, a way to back out of that risk. What can we do to mitigate the risks that could affect these systems? So we talked specifically about the importance of personal safety, the importance of protecting assets from damage. There's regulatory issues all over the place. HR is a great example. There's PII information, there's medical information that has to be managed. And if you have that bleed over of a business enterprise system tied to a manufacturing system, no matter where you're breached, if you don't have clear separation and protection, it means that everything in the organization is at risk. And regulatory fines are compelling to boards of directors and to leadership at organizations, sometimes even more than the safety aspects. So just kind of bear these elements in mind if you haven't given consideration to this in the past. All right, so now we're gonna get more towards our boom, boom, out goes the lights theme here. So what I'm going to do here is try to define two distinct categories of attacks, if you will. I'm assuming some of you have experienced malware on your own computer, maybe in a system, a virus that's run rampant in some manner. I'd be hopeful that your experience from that is that you just fell prey to something that really wasn't targeting you specifically, but it was out there broadly targeting anybody that could be affected by it. Same way a common cold transfers itself. It doesn't have the name Fred on it, I don't think, unless you're, as far as you know, but it has the capability of spreading and affecting people in a non-targeted way. And that historically has been the objective of much of the malware in these viruses. It's find as many machines as possible and just continue to push itself to affect as many more machines as possible. Those types of events, of course, affect systems that are brewing beer and baking our bread and making our cars and all of that. But what has emerged is that we now see very highly targeted attacks, where there are sophisticated threat actors out there that are saying, you know what, I want the plans to the next Volkswagen diesel engine because I can build it faster, cheaper, and I'm going to establish my footprint in my marketplace. Corporate espionage stuff, right? Or targeted actors that are thinking about, well, you know what, if I can disrupt the system, I can disrupt an entire supply chain, and I can build an opportunity for myself as a supplier in this environment. These are actual strategies that are being used by very sophisticated actors to affect businesses that we depend on, that we're customers of, and we see this level of sophistication constantly getting scarier and scarier. And if we take that to a national security level, there are now documented events. We're going to talk about a couple here of attacks that have been very intentional at trying to disrupt something that is going to have generate some political position, or it's going to be disruptive on a wide scale to affect a community at large, or even the entire country at large. So I'm trying to draw this contrast that there's stuff that just affects us, and there's stuff that's really directed at us. So let's walk down this chart just a little bit here. We'll start on the non-targeted side with some specific details about a couple of, we'll specifically talk about a malware strain called Conficker. Has anybody ever heard of this particular malware? This is an old one. You have? This is an old one. And it was, I put up their vintage 2008. So here we are, we're, what, 7 years? I don't know, 7, 8 years, I can't do that math. Wow, that's weird. I should be able to do that math. That is an extremely well-known strain of malware. In fact, there are patches available for the operating system to actually mitigate or remediate the risk to that. Yet we still see Conficker running rampant in systems today, in business enterprises, and we see it on the factory floor of many production facilities. It's less surprising to me to see it on the factory floor, because when many of these systems are installed, it's that set it and forget it mentality. We put it in 10 years ago. We're going to brew our beer every day for the next 10 years until something breaks. Fix it quick, keep brewing beer. Those systems are susceptible because they don't evolve nearly as fast as our business enterprise systems. Ironically, we still see this non-targeted Conficker malware popping up in a lot of places. And it's not only a nuisance, but it is disruptive. It is disruptive. It can affect the safety, the stability of the system. It can absolutely affect the productivity, which you keep walking that line, and eventually it's the profitability, it's the reputation of the company. It's very unfortunate, but it's very real as well. And there was a German nuclear power plant on April of 2016, this year, that found Conficker inside their air gap, inside the control system. How it got there? We can come up with all the attack vectors, USB sticks, somebody with their PC that came in to commission something, to upgrade something, who knows what. Who knows what. The point is this is our problem set. Something from 2008 is still affecting us, and it's affecting one of the most critical systems that we normally talk about. today, non-targeted. Ransomware. Anybody affected by ransomware? You specifically? Did you pay?
My school.
Oh,
No, we had cloud backups. It just extra work. Took care of it. No problem.
very smart.
It was annoying.
Very smart. People, process, and technology. So you get bit by ransomware, and the first thing you hear is, well, you should have had good backups. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Good move. So anybody not familiar with this whole ransomware malware strain? No, I'll go through it a little bit. So the concept is, this is a malware strain, again, normally not targeted, that if it infiltrates your system, which could be a single box, it might be a series of servers that you have in your data center. What it does is it will walk very quickly through your file structure, identifying the content, encrypting that content with a key that only the bad guys know. And now you have all this encrypted content that, and by the way, after it encrypts it, of course, it deletes your good stuff. So now you're in this position where the files are still there, but you can't access them because you don't have the special key. And this is an entire business model that's been built up by, well, I don't even know who to attribute it to, because there's a variety of actors out there, but it's like a mob-like scenario that you have digital criminals out there. And what they will do is they will inform you, we've just encrypted your files. If you're interested in getting your content back, here's the price you pay. And by paying that price, we'll give you a key to unlock your files. It's a cat and mouse game because this is criminal activity. And what many of these criminals are doing is that, yeah, you can pay the ransom to gain access to your files, but you're probably not going to get them all back. So they're criminals. I mean, what do you expect? They're not going to be honest with you. The other thing is, if you don't move quickly, even if you choose to do business with these criminals, they may not be there because they're running from law enforcement. And they may actually lose the key that they used in order to encrypt your files in the first place. This is a growing, very problematic issue, and the solution, the best solution, really is to maintain, very careful backups and make sure that if you fall prey to this, you have some type of continuity and recovery plan that you can fall back on. Most law enforcement will encourage you not to pay the ransom because it's, of course, just feeding that beast. But even if you do, don't expect necessarily to get everything back. So.
I was even suggesting to have a Bitcoin account ahead of time.
That's excellent. Excellent point. You're right, they don't actually take real money. They use this digital currency all to hide their trail, that's a good point. So I bring that one up because Michigan, Lansing Board of Water and Light. This one was very recent. I didn't put a date on this. Oh, I did. April 25th of 2016. So they didn't have the data backups, and that's problematic in a control system that was installed 20 or 30 years ago, where the programs that are in that device that you're using to maintain the system may no longer be accessible. As you replace products, you might not be able to actually recreate the very system that you've depended on for 2 or 3 decades, or that we depend on as consumers of clean water. All right, so let's move to the highly targeted side, getting closer to our boom boom here. We have instances of the U.S. gas pipeline infrastructure being infiltrated, where it has been attributed to Chinese intruders. We can argue if that's nation-state attack or if that's some independent group in China. I'd argue that there isn't much difference. Okay, but you can go read about those. You're just a couple of Google keywords away from seeing a lot of that type of detail. We're not going to go into that here. Control system access campaigns. There are some very specific malware strains that have been designed to target industrial control products because they are oftentimes very unique. They use unique operating systems, sometimes proprietary, but sometimes very custom, open technology. And they are using commercial operating systems as well. But the way that they gather data, the way that they share data, the access that they have to being able to interact with other devices is unique. It's necessary for a control system, and we see malware strains now that are designed specifically to come in through a remote connection, to build a beachhead, to start analyzing the system that it's connected to build intelligence and shuttle that off to whoever's receiving it, and that allows whoever the threat actor is to begin planning their attack. So we see these strains that are really designed for reconnaissance purposes that very quickly morph into enablers for the disruption, the damage, the destruction that oftentimes motivates many of these attackers. So you can go read about Black Energy and Black Energy 2, another one called Havix. And if you go way back to 2010, there's even a strain you may have heard of called Stuxnet. And that was one of the highest profile to date strains of malware, very unique attack profile using some very unique vulnerabilities in operating systems and in control systems. So read about that one. I didn't want to go into that because I wanted to look more closely at the recent ones, like some news coming out of New York of a dam, a hydroelectric dam that was infiltrated. It was attributed to the Iranians, and it was the first time that the U.S. really came out strong and said we can identify the threat actors, and we're pinning this one on the Iranians. I don't personally think that one was intentional. I think it was a drive-by. They were scanning the internet. They found some controls equipment that shouldn't have been exposed to the internet, and they kind of put a little placeholder there, but they got caught for going a little bit too deep into that system on a reconnaissance effort. So here's the Boom Boom, German steel mill. And we've got a slide on that. That is about a blast furnace that was actually damaged beyond repair. That's the Boom Boom. And the Out Goes the Lights is the Ukrainian power grid attack. These are separated by about a year, but we're going to dig in a little bit deeper here. So, German steel mill. Go read about this one because I packed some of the content here on a slide. These things always happen around the holidays too. And it's probably because we're at our weakest, and this is where people are, different people on different shifts. But you'll see this one occurred in December of 2014, and the Ukrainians is December of 2015. What happened here is that this comes back to that IT-OT convergence, the fact that we see these business enterprise systems and factories connected together. What has happened in this example, this real-world example, is that there was an attacker that, let me back up. There's a group in Germany called BSI, and I won't even make an attempt to pronounce it. You can see for yourself. This is an information security group of the German government. They published a report identifying that there was damage that occurred in a German steel mill, and this damage was significant enough that it took the system offline. And you don't just run to Best Buy to buy another blast furnace. These are things that take a long time you have to plan ahead to get one of these and get it installed. So a disruption or damage of equipment like this means that this has had a immediate consequence to an organization that probably never planned for this level of destruction. This German report, it was absent of a lot of detail, but it gave enough information that the attack had actually started at the business enterprise. It was a spear phishing attack within an email where it was a very, very carefully crafted email that targeted some individual in the business because HR wasn't paying attention or whatever. I don't know. I'm kidding, of course. Maybe not, but. So this spear phishing email comes in with very likely some innocuous link to manipulate, social engineer the receiver, to click on something, to go somewhere, all to allow the threat actor to establish a position in the business system and start the reconnaissance process of, hey, I'm in here, what's connected? And they start to see the data center, they start to see the users, start to build this picture of what that environment looks like. And very quickly, they start to identify the points of separation, trying to keep the control system separated from the business system, which may be nothing more than a firewall. And firewalls are wonderful devices when applied and maintained properly. But in my 20-some years, I have come across so many firewalls that if anybody's ever written firewall rules, there's something called the any rule, which is a very common practice of taking a very expensive firewall and treating it as nothing more than an Ethernet router. Nothing more than a router. It's the most expensive router that you can apply in your system. It's very likely the fact that the business enterprise allowed for a pivot through the system to come into the control system, that there was a firewall that was identified, but somehow they were able to penetrate that and enter the control system, which tells me the rule set wasn't appropriate, or maybe there was even a different attack vector where they bypassed it completely to gain access into the crown jewels of the steel mill. Very likely. So the results are a simple spear phishing email to one individual in the organization can open up Pandora's box and allow for access to reach critical equipment that not only can take the company offline and affect its profitability, but there are real people working in the vicinity of this equipment. And if it's not a blast furnace, if it's a nuclear power plant, the consequences just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, so go read about this one. If you can even get there is an English version. I think it's been translated, but you can learn a few more details about it. So we can learn from this that we know spear phishing occurs. We know that sometimes we're not paying attention to those points of separation between the enterprise and the factory. We got to maintain those layers of defense. And we have to recognize that those layers of defense, they have to continually shrink all the way down to the most critical elements. And the blast furnace is not part of the control system. The control system is there to run the blast furnace. So the last bastion that we have to protect are the control elements that are dealing with the pressures and the temperatures and the flows and all the stuff associated with that. So just by targeting that equipment, the consequences can become very expensive, very great, very rapidly. So could this have been seen? Could it have been heard? Could it have been prevented? Did they miss some things? The report says that malware strain was in the system for over 6 months. Sorry, the attackers were in the system for over 6 months doing reconnaissance before this event took place. And I actually said attackers. I have to back up from that because the German report doesn't attribute it to an individual or a group. They left that out for who knows what. Could have been an insider that knew enough that chose this approach. We don't know. It's unfortunate that the report doesn't go into a greater detail because we can learn from it and we can plan better if we know about it. Okay? We're going to shift gears, and I'm probably running a little bit long, but any thoughts hitting you right now? Should we just keep going? Okay.
I'm going to show my ignorance about this because I'm learning about this, but when it's in there, are there programs that you can run to detect if one of those viruses or somebody's in there doing reconnaissance?
So the answer is yes. And that's a qualified yes, because many of these industrial systems, control systems in general, I need to be a little more open to in general here. You'll find a variety of technologies. Some of these are the same stuff that we use in our business enterprise, where we can install antivirus, endpoint security, we can have intrusion detection technology that operates very successfully in that environment, but there's these other devices, very specialized, that you can't install antivirus on them. There's no concept of endpoint security. So we're now, because there's a need, we're now starting to see some products emerge that are giving us the visibility, the ability to get closer to those devices, and since we have data points like this, it's putting pressure on the manufacturers of that equipment to take steps to harden those devices and give us visibility to stuff that's otherwise out of reach. Yeah.
Can I add?
No,
No?
of course. Yeah.
With the system like this, you also see some communication to what is called command and control. So once they put something inside, they communicate to the head office, to command and control, and trying to identify such unusual traffic. This may eliminate sometimes, because they're not pushing all the logic at one time. It's just step by step, little step.
Very subtle.
So there are security controls that can focus on the installation of malware. But if you back up a moment to the first part of your question, which is that reconnaissance, there's really nothing out there in terms of the network mapping, that adversary initially getting a foothold and then actually mapping out the networks and then fingerprinting the operating systems to then go into the next stage within that cyber kill chain, which is really the weaponization development of how I'm going to attack your system. That's why you see adversaries there for 6 months to 9 months.
Well, it's the
That's
same way on the
part
IT
that's
side
really-
too. So it's not just
Exactly,
on the OT
exactly.
side. I mean, the IT side, I think it's like an average of 200 and something days.
It
like,
is.
and that's
Yep.
just your data breach. That's not even
Yeah.
the other
Exactly.
thing. I mean, you're doing stuff to where you're not trying to make super huge moves all at one time because that's going to go over a certain threshold. It's going to look like a anonymous behavior. You want to look like just somebody on your network doing their day in and day
That's right.
out because networks aren't stagnant. They're not
Low and
static.
slow.
Yeah.
That's right.
In this case, don't you think that this caught them totally by surprise? Maybe in the sense that it's never happened to us before, we don't have anybody to deal with it, we're not even thinking of it, and they took advantage of that a little bit also.
That's right.
What's the
I'm
time
sure.
frame? Well, this was
That was
12 or
December of 2014.
14, so, it's
Yeah.
still on the early
Yeah.
parts of
And they
it.
also didn't see that as like even being an attack vector because they're like, oh, we have it air gapped and everything like that, to where everybody's seeing those as separate networks versus that was really prior to that convergence type of thing.
Yep.
And that's, oh, go ahead.
We don't have a log that keeps track of
Ah.
all the users, that if you have a suspicious user,
No one's there to look at it.
If the logs
That's
exist.
another part of it, yeah, it exists too.
But if
So
I-
who knows?
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Who knows?
No, I want to hear
I'm
your
done,
thought
I'm
first. Well, yeah, so if you pawn or take over a host, a lot of times you're hijacking that account, or you're hijacking that system account anyway. So, and quite frankly, in the control space, the user is almost irrelevant anyway, because a lot of times they'll have to share that user account between shifts. Because when the operator really earns their money is when something goes wrong, right? So it's yeah.
I'm going to play off of what you said. Eric, can you turn the lights out? I'm serious. Would you turn the lights out?
Don't hit me.
Did the light switch know that it was Eric?
No.
No. There was no authentication to prove that Eric, was Eric to turn out those lights. You're authorized.
Right.
This is your place, right? But I could go do that. And that's a shortcoming in the control systems today, in that you have these very smart, complex products called programmable logic controllers. This is where the program runs that drives all the operation. And when they say, when the controller decides, because this program says it's time to turn out the lights, it sends a signal to a light switch and the lights go off. That signal doesn't prove that anything other than it's a command to turn the lights off. Whether it was Eric, whether it was me, whether it was somebody that kind of peeked around the corner and shut it off, there's no authentication. What the point I'm trying to get at is that if I have network access, that really smart device that's controlling that process, I don't even need that to be able to send a command to a light switch to turn out the lights. We're talking about very simple control systems, and only now are we starting to see the technology emerge that there is a validation that Eric is Eric, that he's authorized to turn off the lights, but when we think about systems installed 15, 20 years ago, it's going to be a long time before we get that sophistication level in the systems we depend on. Go ahead.
Well, in the methodology from the control system side of things, is IT is CIA, which is confidentiality, integrity, availability. And OT is AIC, which is availability, integrity, and confidentiality. Couple that with the fact that, like Doug said, is because I've programmed these systems in the past, is it's all about convenience. And so while there are systems that will log the users, and usually if a phishing's gotten a user, then that negates that. But however, there's also another aspect of this, is the vendor will leave a back door in there. Because they may have 20 service technicians that any one of them may come work on the system, and they have a single username and password. So it's something that just kind of developed on its own, and the whole security through obscurity, and all of the systems. I mean, you can go look at any building in Atlanta. If the company I used to work for services, I can get in it.
But on those, I mean, because the big thing now is having, like you said, for support purposes, having like a web portal that you're able to get into. And so then you put that system directly connected to the internet, and then finding things via Shodan or whatever it
That's
might
right.
be that's the scariest stuff for me, which the stuff that you can find on there.
The only means of defense is the username and password for the control system. And going back to your point, is in the IT space, there's a life cycle of what, 3 to 5 years? In the control space, it's 20. I mean, you know, so you may have machines running XP.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
One more thing on the furnace. You know, typically we sell boiler burners. You have electromechanical override, so the pressure
Sure.
temperature gets too high, it shuts the system down. So somehow they breached that too, right? And somehow they mitigated that.
You're right. So let's talk old school, new school.
Yeah.
Old school, which is good school, by the way, is that your safety instrumented system, your safety controls are completely separated and segregated from the control system itself. Where possible, you have mechanical overrides that don't require digital information to do their job. That's old school. New school is, you know what? We want diagnostic information from our safety system. So we're going to move all that stuff onto the same very network that's controlling this process. And you know, Roger and I have specifically gone out to sell the benefits of safety, what's known as functional safety equipment. And there's some compelling arguments about, you know, how it streamlines the process and gives you more information. What wasn't considered 15 years ago when industry started down this path is that there are malicious actors out there. And what we've done is we've made it very convenient as we brought these products, these digital products that we rely on for safety, into the same environment as the control. So, you know, fortunately, it's you still find a lot of conservative, you know, engineers out there that are saying there's no good reason for me to not have mechanical overrides in addition to the digital, you know, safety measures that are in place. But it's become very.
You had to somehow fool the system and tell it, all right, now you're, instead of reading 50 PSI.
That's right.
You're going up to 500, but it's telling it, you keep getting it to go.
All right, there was a Die Hard movie, and I can't remember which one. It was a plane. It's like 2 or 3, where I think the bad guy said, we're going to change what the plane thinks the altitude is of the runway, right? We're going to put it below the runway, so the plane came in too fast. Remember that? Yeah.
Die Hard?
It was a Die Hard. I don't know which one it was. I think it was the Washington Dulles Airport is what I remember.
It was Chicago.
Chicago? Okay.
Yeah, they changed the settings on the airport. Yeah, and they hit it.
At the time, that was, you know, Hollywood magic. And so, oh, that's crazy. Well, guess what? That stuff really does happen. And there, you know, in that case, if you're solely relying on the digital information of a system that could be potentially compromised, and you have no other point, you know, to check against it, no other second data point to validate, who knows if you're dealing with truth or fiction at that point?
There was an incident, I don't remember which airport in the United States. The airplanes were experiencing some problems with the GPS, and it happened from time to time. Finally, they started investigating this. They found that the driver of the truck, the owner of the company installed the GPS, he wanted to interrupt this. So he installed some devices to kind of interrupt the GPS receiver, but it affected the airport when he was driving next to the airport. It was such a strong that
I still find myself laughing about it, and then I quickly turn to, wow, yeah, that's pretty serious too. So,
A lot of the problems is, and this may have already been said, is a lot of these BAS, DCS, PLC networks, I think somebody said this before, they were designed 15, 20 years ago. A lot of this junk was not going on then.
mm-hmm.
Plus, it was never, until you got people saying, wow, there's valuable data there, you really never had those networks connected to the business networks, so that it was like, okay, there's no way nobody's going to be able to get in here. Well, that's how it was designed. Then all of a sudden, oh, somebody got a bright idea. Let's hook up to the corporate network. Wow, we can get all kinds of good data. Well, at the same time, you're opening up your manufacturing or BAS or whatever it is to all these vulnerabilities that the IT people were knew about, were working with, but all of a sudden, now there's all these vulnerabilities, like Fred said, Windows XP. I actually know a lot of systems that still have that on there.
I bet.
Windows 2000. And that may make y'all cringe, but it's a reality in the control systems world.
It is, yeah.
But I think it's even more compounded now because, but now I was seeing systems connected 16, 17 years ago with the first web servers for SCADA.
Right.
Now you can't even buy a PLC without it having a web server, and worse,
And
it's
embedded
enabled by
into it.
default.
Yeah.
Right? But it's a culture of how these projects are engineered. So in my 25 years, I've only seen 3 site-wide migrations or greenfield. That means every project is only piecemeal, one part of the facility. So now you're interoperating your 2012 servers with your 2000 server systems on that same network, and they have to communicate it with the same legacy protocols because it's important that you share information. So you do not have this clean slate event where you can, okay, now we're going to start doing this different.
Right.
So,
How many of you have a garage with a garage door opener? All right, how old is your garage door opener?
About a year and a half.
Oh, you've got a new one.
Yeah.
So you got iPhone app? Got an iPhone app for it and all that?
I don't have one. I probably could get one.
Okay. All right, older than 5 years? More than 10 years old? Oh, we needed just those, 4 more people.
I'll buy it. Over 10 years.
Over 10 years. Your
It's 15 years old.
Okay, your garage door opener, just indulge me here, it's a little control system.
Yep.
And in some cases, it came with your house. And if you built your house 20 years ago, you might still have the same garage door opener. Obviously not in this room, but there's risk associated with garage door openers, right? I mean, they can fail and your spring can break and hurt somebody, or the door might fall, and there's all those scenarios. But we don't tend to think of that as critical because it's just there when we need it until something goes wrong. Yet that is by all accounts an archaic control system. Yet you can still buy the same one today with that archaic technology. You can go really contemporary and now open it from right here if you want to let intruders in while you're away from your house. All right, probably not a great analogy, but just trying to get you in the mindset of this set it and forget it, because that is what is running most of this country, most of the countries on this planet, is a set it and forget it control system. Okay, so let's push through this and there's still pizza back there, and there's warming up cool beer and other beverages. So, so we're going to go to the outgo the lights portion of this. How we doing? We still okay? Because I can sit down and stop talking when you guys are ready. So let's take a look at the Ukraine. I put a nice map. I did not know where the Ukraine is, and I know that Donald Trump barely knows where the Ukraine is as well. We know he didn't know that was once part of. No, I'm not getting political. It was just okay.
It's Crimea.
It's Crimea.
Crimea is in the bottom there.
Yeah, it's isn't it? Yeah, no. This is not a good map because I think I overlaid something there. But
And the Poland is next to the left.
Poland is this one.
Right.
And where's Vermont?
Where's- That's good. Very good.
200 years ago, the Ukraine was Poland.
Really?
Then Poland doesn't exist.
Yeah. All right. So so we're going to talk about what happened in December of 2015 and why the power grid in the Ukraine fell prey to a highly coordinated cyber attack. And you're going to see what highly coordinated means. We can look at what the attack methods were that were used, what the impacts were from the attack, and part of why we're talking about this is to have an appreciation of what does this incident really mean for industry? How do we learn from this? And how do we make sure that these things don't affect us and others? All right, so that's kind of the objective of this next section here. So first thing I'll start off with is there were 3 electric distribution companies, 3 separate organizations in the Ukraine that were affected by this particular attack. And there's the logos are up there, but these organizations own different parts of the grid, and they were separated by hundreds of miles or hundreds of kilometers.
Georgia Power, Texas Power, Bonneville, no connectivity whatsoever.
Correct,
That is
but
the first interesting thing about this.
but still all part of a common grid, right? Common
Yeah.
transmission distribution system. So you have that interdependency, and there's probably, a lot of load sharing and changes in the system. I'm not an expert on T&D for utilities. You mentioned that you've got a background there, so.
Not in electric power.
Okay. All right, so one thing I haven't mentioned is when this event occurred, there was a U.S. delegation that was put together of industry experts that actually went over to the Ukraine. And this delegation had an opportunity of talking with these companies, at looking at the attack vectors that were used, the techniques that were used, and I have some screenshots of some of the actual spearfishing that took place here. It's a great learning opportunity for us because in the U.S., when we look across the critical infrastructures, there's really 2 critical infrastructures that are the most highly regulated. I'm talking critical infrastructures. I might say 3. If we take finance away, I'll bring it back down to 2. Nuclear, which is standalone. There's special regulatory actions for that, and then the power and utilities, where there's a group called NERC. Actually, there's the FERC group, the federal level, and there's NERC, which is an organization. It's a consortia. It's an own organization that is driven by the industry to be defining the regulations that they adhere to. But there are consequences for not adhering to the standards defined by this group. It's trying to be very progressive in what actions are being taken to protect the grid here in the United States. Okay?
But it's not that simple.
Of course not.
NERC is have authority only for the transmission company, for the bulk transmission company. The distribution companies, they are under the state. They are not regulated by federal, by NERC. And this varies from state to state. Some states started doing some guidelines for cybersecurity, for example. New Jersey was the first. But from state to state, it's completely different.
Excellent point. Let me add to that just a little bit, because even NERC, as they define these standards, there are certain sizes of power generation facilities that do not fall under those requirements. And I think is it 1,500 megawatts?
I don't remember.
I should know this. But it's really the larger size power plants that fall under the regulations where they're supposed to be taking steps to secure these systems and protect these systems. Anything that's under that threshold is encouraged but not held accountable. Just strong suggestions, if you will. And hopefully that news tightens a bit in the future to try and bring more commonality across all of this, because even though smaller power plants have far-reaching consequences on schools, on hospitals, on our homes, et cetera. All right, so there's 3 distribution companies that were affected by this particular attack, and I do think that the words highly coordinated cyber attack are very fitting here, because there were great lengths that were taken by the attackers to understand these systems to a degree that frankly is amazing, because all indications are that they were not insiders, that they were actually outsiders that had gained access and started mapping and building their intelligence of the system. So the attack was focused on disrupting power and actually causing physical damage to the control system and to control products in this system. It was targeted, I told you 3 companies. It was synchronized in that they literally set their watches to when the attack was being launched, and they calculated what the results of this attack were going to generate from public's reaction, from the company's reaction, and they took additional steps to continue this disruption. And we'll talk about what that means more in just a moment. The outages lasted between 3 and 6 hours. So even though these power systems were damaged, there were mechanical overriding techniques that could be used to get power back into the grid. But it required human intervention, and those were probably the longest 3 to 6 hours for some of those people in a very long time. 225,000 customers affected. I've seen even higher numbers. It's tough to pin a precise figure on that, but we shouldn't lose sight that there were businesses affected, there were hospitals that were affected. This was on December 23rd, so whoever had Christmas lights on their house in the Ukraine and that area, guess what? You're no longer the envy of your neighborhood, because, the system was restored, but it was operating at a degraded state. And even 6 months after this event, it was still operating at a degraded state, because the power companies were concerned that they didn't fully eradicate the system of the after effects, and they still had damaged equipment, so it was still a very manual process to keep the system up and running. And it was staged. There were multiple phases of the attack and multiple stages of the attack that were launched. This is an actual screen capture that came from the delegation, the US delegates that went over there to analyze this event. This is the spear phishing attack, and this generated a pop-up for Microsoft Office. Basically, is it Russian? What's the predominant language in Ukraine, if I may ask my Vermontian friend? Ukrainian? Okay.
The characters are similar to Cyrillic.
Okay.
But the language has some differences, so it's Ukrainian language.
Okay, thank you for that. So I can't read it, but you guys can piece enough together that this is something that would pop up on your screen. Someone that's just trying to get their job done in their office environment is going to say, you know what, how do I make it go away? Because we're humans. That's the way that we operate. So this is the actual screenshot of the event that allowed the spear phishing attack to gain its foothold in the system. And this is behind this, it says here that the specific malware strain was called Black Energy. That was the consequence of clicking on this. It enabled a very, very unique set of malware designed to affect particular elements of this control system. So it all started with that prior screen. Roger brought up this, I don't know if you said kill chain specifically, maybe you did, but there's this attack methodology. It's more of a timeline, if you will, for how these attacks occur. I mean, there's always some level of reconnaissance, building a knowledge of the item that you're going after. And that is a very protracted timeline. Normally the intelligence is measured in days, weeks, months. You mentioned, I think it was like 228 days or somewhere in there.
With one of the recent reports, it has been decreased by 40 days.
Yeah, well,
The reconnaissance also starts even prior to even getting on board. I mean, especially for being a highly targeted spear phishing
right.
campaign. I mean, you got to really do your research on that to try to make sure that somebody click on a lot of those things. Granted, some people will still click on it even if it's not highly targeted. But
exactly. If I get an email from HR, I'm pretty apt to open that, especially if it says employee salaries.xls from HR. So yeah, of course, I'm curious.
Your raise.
Yeah.
Or if you're in the procurement department and you get a contract to sign and pay and it has an attachment with a macro-enabled like Excel document to it, I mean, they get those every single day.
Yep. There you go. So this phase, the December 23rd date, is when the action on objectives occurred. That's when the event, when the attack actually happened, and they began. They went from we're building intelligence and plan to let's go execute. So think of it like D-Day. That's when the real action happened. But there are these different phases that an attacker will pass through to build the intelligence and build that plan. And that's really what is highlighted here. The spearfish came in, the malware was introduced into the system. It opened up the command and control communication, so there was two-way communication between the outside actor as this intelligence was built, so they could customize the code and start directing how they pivot through the system. There were new tools that were introduced into the system, keyloggers to track passwords, so they could obtain what is really the most important aspect of the system, which is what we didn't see when Eric turned out the lights, is the credentials of the user. Because if I own your credentials as a user, I become you in these systems. I become you. If I have your username and password and I know your Gmail address, I can become you and really be devastating with what I do. So they were able to obtain credentials in the system and become a trusted entity within that system. And by harvesting those credentials, it gave them free rein because of the linkage between the enterprise and the control systems here. So we're right back to the dangers that come with IT, OT convergence, contrasting with the benefits that also come with that level of convergence. So multi-staged attack. Some key aspects to show you the level of sophistication of this attack. The devices that are used in control systems are highly specialized. I mentioned before that they're running unique operating systems. They perform a specific function very well, but they don't typically go out of bounds there. Because they're designed for a specific purpose. Well, when, like all complex devices, they have to be upgradable. And just like you may have updated your phone with new firmware or your home router with new firmware, these devices can also be uploaded with new firmware images. That was used as an attack vector that the attackers, because they had command and control and communication into the system, they had mapped all of the devices that are connected. They identified specifics about those devices. They were able to maliciously upload firmware into those devices. And Has anybody ever had a firmware upload fail? Sometimes you can't recover the device. You brick the device. You brick the device. It's a very vulnerable state when you're going through a firmware upgrade, or a BIOS upgrade for a PC is another great example where it's very vulnerable. So here's the deal. They used that as an attack vector, and they were very malicious about uploading corrupted firmware into these control devices to brick them. Meaning that you don't just walk over and cycle power and they come back. You have to rip and replace. And you better have spares on hand if you're doing that.
And the programs to put in them.
Good point.
Surprise.
Good point. Very good
Because
point.
the programs you have on the computer doesn't necessarily mean it's the program that's in that.
Excellent point.
Can I interrupt you just for a second?
Of course, sure.
I was on the FBI, they did a thing, webinar, okay? And the guy just kind of blew over this UPS thing. So what they did is they attacked the UPS to take it down, to make sure the system stayed down. Is that what that was all about?
Yes.
Sounded kind of different. In fact, I wasn't sure what the hell it was talking about.
Excellent point there. So the UPSs, these uninterruptible power supplies, yeah, they provide power, but they're all network connected.
Right.
And you don't have to authenticate to most of them to be able to pull information out of them or even change their configuration, including shutting them off. Those were on the same very system as the control elements. So when they launch this attack to completely cripple the control equipment, they were shutting off the UPSs. So not only did they shut off power to the power plant, but the whole backup system was shut off, and that was a way that they maintained that disruption in the system for a long period of time. It's a good point. One thing, I'm going to get to the phone systems. One thing I want to say here is that what's been purported is that it was corrupted firmware loaded into these control devices to basically make them bricks. That's how it's been portrayed. But there,
Were those devices at the sites, or were those at the control center? I'm thinking PLCs out at the site got bricked. Is that-
these were not the PLCs though. These were other field instruments. Do you know which ones they were?
No, but I think it goes back to that length of time of the reconnaissance, understanding what that equipment, because they did some lab testing, obviously, right? So they went out and bought this and crafted that firmware.
Yep.
So these were remote devices at the substation, the RTUs and the decoders, plus there were some converters between Ethernet and serial port. And I think everything was changed. I mean, many was changed with the firmware. This is probably the first case when I heard about the changing the firmware in such a scale at all.
So I need to be careful here, because what was determined is it was corrupted firmware loaded into those devices to disable those devices. I understand there's over 40,000 devices that are part of all of these control systems. And I will tell you from my personal experience, it's easy to corrupt firmware and take out these devices, but the fact remains that someone has the capability of actually manipulating firmware and having it be accepted by those devices as well. And what they were able to pick out very quickly is the ones that aren't working, but it kind of leaves the question in your mind, what if there was firmware that was actually loaded into some other devices that didn't fail, that they come back at a later time and say, you know what, it's time to activate that as a different attack vector. And that's part of the reason why we see them operating at a degraded state. They're very cautious at this point, because even if they build their wall around this system, they still don't know if there's a ticking time bomb on the inside. That's a little nuance that has been overlooked here. UPSs, that was a great addition from you. There was also, I had mentioned the planning that went into this attack. I'm convinced there was a room probably like this with whiteboards, and the attackers got up there and said, we're going to do this, and then this, and then this, and then they're going to do this, and we're going to do this. One of the results was they attacked the telephone support system for the company. So when your lights went out on December 23rd and you went to call the power company, there was no one there to answer because your call wasn't even getting through. And they couldn't get to their dispatchers to go and start the recovery process. So not only did they take out the control system, but they took out a completely different system that was a dependency for them to begin the recovery process. Now that's pretty sophisticated. That's a highly sophisticated cyber attack. Thank goodness it was in Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
All right, so here's the deal. When this first occurred, that comment I made, that flippant comment, thank God it was in the Ukraine. Sometimes we just react that we think, it's not here. It's the Ukrainians. How good can those systems be? Surely we're better. The delegation that went over to look at these systems went in there thinking, these are going to be archaic systems, poorly managed. Well, guess what? What they found is that the Ukrainians had built these systems very close to the same exact standards called out by NERC CIP that are supposed to be protecting our own grid infrastructure here in the United States. There wasn't this dramatic departure. So when we say, they're the Ukrainians, what do they know? They know a lot. These were contemporary systems meeting standards that we rely on in the United States. So if we're not learning from this,
I would agree with this.
okay?
I agree with this one item, especially. There was a firewall between the business network and the SCADA network. How they get from the business network to SCADA network? They found there was a VPN. They found the password for the VPN. It shouldn't be static VPN. It should be two-factor authentication. This is little, but a big difference. When I was introducing two-factor authentication in 2009 probably, I was expecting the kind of resistance from the people who have to use it. Fortunately, on the news there was about the Chinese hackers attacking power grid in the United States. Nobody asked anything. But the two-factor authentication, it isn't enough. So it is.
Yeah.
It looks like small, but big difference.
Very big difference.
Why they allow to get from the control center to the endpoint device? Why they open the control channel, not the control channel, the maintenance channel? They shouldn't do it.
No disagreement from me. One thing I want to point out is 3 different power companies in the Ukraine. I don't know if it was the same attack vector. I would expect it's not for establishing their position across all 3. But you bring up an excellent point. And even if the password wasn't known, there's still potential that firewall had misconfigured rules, or maybe might not have even been anything more than a router in that system. We don't necessarily know. And I guess one last comment, in my years and your years, that firewall is oftentimes viewed as that point of what comes in and what goes out, but almost always there's something that circumvents that system. Wireless has become a favorite means of circumventing all firewalls because of its convenience as well. But excellent point, though.
I got a
Go ahead.
question. Could some of this just been cascading load shift that knocked the rest of it out? It wasn't? Because like in the, when the northeast power grid, when we started tripping off and loads were shifting.
So that would be an example of a cyber physical behavior, but in this particular example. So one thing that bothers me, what I hear from the security community is this was a low tech. A lot of it.
Right.
My argument is that this was just as technical as it had to be. This was highly coordinated and very advanced, even though it used low tech methods. Because you're only going to deploy the methods that you have to. Developers of malware are like any other developers. You're just going to develop what you have to.
That's right.
Yeah, these are very specific systems. The SCADA system, there's a number of these systems. They're not similar. The idea is similar, but how they work inside. So you have to have very sophisticated people. The devices in the field, there is several companies, well-known companies, but how to change the firmware, how to, this was really.
So there's one thing that has really bothered me about this that I've kind of discussing. There's been a lot of analysis on this. If you look at the level of lab testing and
How are we doing on time?
Very well.
All right, great.
Very well coordinated. You look at all the factors. You have to ask yourself, what is the motivation for I think it's one of two things. Is it want to go finish lab tests to prove that they can do this, so that they get some participants in other states to know that they can bring down the grade company, or it was a message to the U.S. We can get you.
Yeah.
That's
my biggest
there's
question.
there's not insight into what was the motivation behind investing the amount of money and resources.
I want you to hold that thought,
Oh,
okay?
yes, I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad you said that, because until about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I was not sure that we could establish what a logical motivation might be. So hold that. I've got a slide that I think is going to get at that. No, that's fine. Let's power through this, and then I can shut up, and we can actually talk a little bit more here. So disruptive, destructive attack. They were using virtual private networks, encrypted channels for command and control to communicate with the system. They had the credentials of actual people that were authorized and trusted to interact with the system. We know they compromised hosts. They hijacked this dispatcher workstation. Admittedly, I don't really appreciate how much control was gained by that, but suffice it to say, that was a pretty important part of being able to build that reconnaissance and the full picture of the system. Sending commands, direct commands to these control devices. I mentioned the light switch with Eric not authenticating. If you connect to the wire, you can craft a message to control a system. And there's very little that is going to stop you, because there's this absence of authentication in the system. They actually used a specific malware strain called KillDisk to effectively wipe away their breadcrumbs. So this is kind of the leave no footprints philosophy. Cause your damage, disrupt, erase your trail, and get out. So they actually left these machines in a state that if there weren't backups, even if there were backups, there's a whole recovery process that takes time, and it can be very complex and probably not as up to date as it should be. We talked about the discovery of the field devices, about actually affecting the firmware in those devices to disable and require them to be physically replaced. We've seen how it's a sequenced attack to cause the harm, to destroy the data and remove their fingerprints. And this was, of course, significant business damage, but the further reaching consequences touched many other businesses and many other individuals. All right, so there are a number of ways that we can measure risk. I elected for this slide to just pick on three: our threat vectors, the weaknesses in the systems, and what the impacts can be by exploiting those weaknesses. So what we are always tasked to do as security practitioners, as individuals that are protecting whatever our crown jewels are, is to find an acceptable level of risk. We cross the street every day because we've determined there's an acceptable level of risk when we look both ways, because we mitigate the risk of getting hit by a car by looking both ways. So a simple equation like this, if we come back to the Ukrainian power grid attack, let's take a look at a couple of things here. We know what the weakness is: people, process, technology. We know the weakness is that this is a system that we depend upon. It's a complex system that's probably not there's going to be vulnerability somewhere in that system. It's inevitable that there will be a vulnerability in that system, whether it comes through a person or whether it's a technology or a failed product. There are just no two ways about it. The attackers will always find a way in, period. We know what the impact is. The lights went out. We know that there are financial consequences. There are political consequences as well. Ukrainians and the Russians aren't on great speaking terms. We'll come back to that in just a moment. So we know what the impact is because we saw the results. We know the date. We know, how many were affected by that, the specific devices that were impacted by it. Let's talk about the threat, though. At the time when I put these slides together, nobody really wanted to speculate too heavily on who the threat actor was. Was it a military effort because we know this is a contentious region because of the past history and a whole variety of things that I can't do justice to describe why it's such a contentious issue. Were there hacktivists that were just out to prove a point? Hey, we can do it. Let's do something fun around Christmas time. Was it a political chess game that was being played here? At the time, there wasn't a lot of information about the actual threat. And that's oftentimes a common thread in some of these attacks is how do you attribute it to the actual threat actor? And for a level of sophistication where they have caused damage and destruction and they've wiped disks and they've made sure that they didn't leave their footprints behind, coming back to your point, many of these devices that are used in these systems, they have no event logging capability. All they do is turn the lights on and off. They don't track how many times they've been pushed or who pushed them. They just weren't designed that way. So in that absence, it's very difficult to attribute these types of events. You have to gather other intelligence to make that leap. But we know that collectively that had a result of making that power system in the Ukraine a target, and we saw what the results were from this particular attack. So I like to talk about means, motives, and opportunities. Now, this is from law enforcement, that if you look at any crime, the reason a crime occurs is that some individual or some group had the means, they had the motive, and they had the opportunity. Mix it up and you've got mom, okay? But the motive is oftentimes the most difficult element to put your finger on. Means is easy. Got a gun, you can rob a liquor store. Opportunity, there's a liquor store. I need money. But the motive isn't always clear. So now this comes back to why I asked Roger to hold off. I'm going to just read this to you. On the eve of the assault, it was Energy Day. This was an entire day dedicated to the power sector, a holiday to recognize and celebrate electricity workers in parts of Eastern Europe. This was the day of the attack. December 22nd speech by Vladimir Putin congratulated his country, and we know his country, his power industry professionals. He singled out their great, strenuous, and highly demanding work at keeping the lights on in Crimea. Kind of interesting, given the proximity of Crimea to the Ukraine. Crimea, in the Russian Republic remains connected today to the Ukrainian power grid. There's a dependency between the Ukraine and Crimea. And there have been power outages in the past, in Crimea specifically, that have been attributed to the Ukrainian something happening in the Ukrainian grid that disrupted power in Crimea. And as you see here, it was attributed to Ukrainian saboteurs. And as a result of this, observers have suggested that those prior blackouts set the stage for the Russians to take potentially an act of vengeance against the Ukrainians. So what's the motive? We don't know the motive. But these are some of the facts that have emerged and some of the speculation that begins to feel like it might make sense here. That You hit us, and we're going to hit you back. So I'm not saying that this is the motivation behind this. I'm suggesting to you that there's a lot of arguments as to why this occurred. This one seems a little plausible to me, given the strenuous relations between these countries. And again, I am not saying that this is the answer, but there was an article that was posted July 18th. It was a 4-part series that actually did, I think, a very nice job at walking through all the details that I've introduced you to, and what I just read to you are excerpts from that report. It's a very compelling story. It may not be completely factual, but go check it out, because this is how we learn, and this is how we can compel industry to take action, and this is how we can make sure that as we're responsible parties, that we're doing what we can, anticipating that events like this can truly happen. So I want to finish up here. So we got to think about how do we get in front of this risk, because these systems are, of course, vulnerable. And what the Energy Information Sharing, what does ISAC stand for? Information Sharing. Sorry, I should know this one too. Yeah, too long. You can go read about their recommended mitigations to this. SANS Institute, the ICS group, were part of the delegation that went and analyzed this. These are some of the mitigations. Control remote access into the system. Make sure that you recognize that things can be discovered in the system, and that intelligence can be built this way. The way that you mitigate this is just making sure that you're matching your security controls against the known threats here. And it's not just the technology, it's about building employee awareness. It's about the processes that are followed, the written policies, and making sure that you have governance against those policies. If anybody works at a company that has policy statements that they're telling you have to adhere to, you have a legitimate reason to ask your company, well, what is the governance that you have in place to verify that those policies are being followed? Policies should never be written unless there's a way to validate that they're being followed. They shouldn't just hope their way into compliance to those. You can also look at, from the ICS CERT, which is the Cyber Emergency Response Team for Industrial Control Systems, they issued an alert that came February 25th. Wow, seriously? 2 months after? To basically say, know what's on your network, control who has access to your network, otherwise bad things might happen. It took them 2 months to put out basically, a completely weak statement that I'm not going to go there.
Security, 3 months after ransomware got big, putting out a release on their stuff. So
there you go.
Thanks.
There you go.
No, they're sending every week several emails about the vulnerabilities of many different industrial controls. Is it helpful or not? I don't know. But they do know.
All right, think about if you're responsible for any system, if it's a control system or if it's a business system, think about what is your real level of visibility to what's happening in that system. And don't just rely on technology. Really think about the level of interaction that people have into that system, because they have to be part of that solution. And I'll tell you what, I'll finish on this slide, because, and this isn't a commercial for SANS Institute, but SANS puts out an annual list they call their top 20, which are recommendations that the whole concept here is, if you apply some of these basic blocking and tackling methods to whatever your system is, you'll go a long way at protecting that system. And they are sequenced in the order of importance. There are companies out there that they only focus on the top 5 of the SANS top 20 list, and that makes a marked improvement in the security posture of that system. So I've highlighted some of these on the top 20 list that had had some basic inventory, some basic monitoring of that system been in place during that reconnaissance phase, they absolutely should have been able to see things like unusual connections between devices as intelligence was being built, as ports were being scanned. They should have absolutely seen indicators of firmware downloads taking place. Now, granted, that happened in a small window, but there are technologies and approaches out there to mitigate the risk of those types of events in real time, even. So take a look at the top 20. It's actually useful. There's many different frameworks. This is very easily digestible and something that you can walk into a boardroom, to your C-level, your C-suite leadership, and I think it's actually a good list overall here. So how about I end it here, and from here on out we just kind of talk and eat some pizza. So, and I can make these slides available if you guys are interested too. Okay, sure. It's easy. Don't plot it. Okay.